I often make smoothies for breakfast with some protein powder and often a couple of chunks of frozen banana just for the texture and a little bit of sweetness. And I bet many of you do the same. But here's the thing. Are the bananas in our smoothies blocking all of the nutritional benefits? Well, today we're going to dig into this and some other food combination anxieties. Welcome to the Nutrition Diva podcast, where we take a closer look at nutrition news, research, and trends so that you can make more informed decisions about what you eat. I'm your host, Monica Reinagel, and I have gotten a couple of emails from listeners lately concerned that they may not be getting as much benefit from their favorite healthy breakfasts as they thought they were. After seeing a headline about a recent study, Carol wondered whether she should stop adding bananas to her smoothie. And meanwhile, Steve is worried about whether he's missing out on the benefits from his blueberries because he is adding them to his yogurt. Now, as someone who regularly adds blueberries to my yogurt and bananas to my smoothies, I take these kinds of questions very seriously. So let's get into the details. The idea that mixing yogurt and blueberries in the same meal might cancel out some of the health benefits has been floating around for a while, and it usually comes down to concerns that the proteins in dairy could interfere with absorption of the antioxidants in the blueberries. And specifically, we're talking about beneficial compounds known as anthocyanins. One of the studies that sparked this concern, which dates back to 2009, found that when milk was combined with polyphenol-rich fruits, such as blueberries or blackberries, the total antioxidant capacity measured in the blood was lower than when the same fruits were eaten with just water. And researchers speculated that milk proteins might bind with polyphenols in the gut, forming complexes that are less easily absorbed. But this finding may not necessarily apply to adding blueberries to yogurt. For one thing, yogurt has a much lower pH than milk, and that subtly changes the structure of those milk proteins and affects their ability to bind to other compounds. And in fact, later studies found that adding blueberries to yogurt increased the yogurt's overall antioxidant capacity. But as we'll talk about a little bit later, there are a lot of other things to consider besides individual nutrient interactions. But before we get into that, let's take a closer look at this banana issue. The article that Carol stumbled across was talking about a recent study that was published in the journal Food and Function, and it looked at how certain enzymes in foods might affect the absorption of flavonols. Flavonols, of course, are beneficial compounds found in foods like cocoa, tea, apples, and also berries. And the researchers were especially interested in an enzyme called polyphenol oxidase, or PPO. This enzyme naturally occurs in some fruits, including bananas. It's the same one, actually, that's responsible for the browning that you see when a banana gets bruised or sliced. So in this study, participants were given smoothies made with flavanol-rich foods like berries or cocoa, and then combined either with banana, which is high in that enzyme PPO, or with pineapple, which is low in PPO. Blood and urine samples were then collected to see how many flavanols made it into circulation. And sure enough, the group that consumed the banana-based smoothie did show significantly lower flavanol absorption compared to the pineapple group. And it was by as much as 84% in some cases. Now, before you kick your banana to the curb, there is some important context that puts this into perspective. Because what happens in a tightly controlled lab experiment doesn't always map neatly onto our everyday eating habits. First of all, the participants were following a special low flavanol diet for the day before and of the study period. And that was necessary in order for the researchers to isolate the specific effects of the test smoothie. But it also means that the findings reflect what happens when flavanols are consumed in a vacuum, so to speak, without the usual background of other flavanol-rich foods that you might be eating in your normal diet, from apples or tea or chocolate or berries. And in real life, we rarely consume nutrients in this type of isolation. Secondly, the smoothies used in this study contained a standardized cocoa extract as the main source of flavanols. This extract was added in a purified, dissolved form, which may be more reactive to enzymes than the flavanols that we might get from whole fruits. And the authors themselves noted that PPO might behave differently with this concentrated source of flavanols than it would with polyphenols in whole foods. Third, the researchers were focused specifically on a single type of flavanol. They didn't measure how banana enzymes might affect the absorption of other antioxidants or nutrients, even though they speculated that there could well be additional interactions. So while the results suggest that there is some interference, the size of that effect was probably exaggerated by the study design and not representative of what happens in real life. And finally, as with the blueberry studies that we were talking about earlier, this sort of what we call bench work is looking at specific short-term effects. It is not designed to evaluate how those effects impact the actual human outcomes that we care about, such as disease risk. It's a little bit like the difference between hitting tennis balls from a serving machine and playing a live match. So, as with the ball machine, everything in these nutrient interaction studies is very tightly controlled, which allows you to isolate and test one variable at a time. But clinical research conducted on real humans in their normal day-to-day lives, to say nothing of how we eat when we aren't participating in a clinical research study, that is much more like playing a tennis match against a real opponent. It's just a different order of complexity. What's true in a lab doesn't always translate directly to how nutrients behave in the context of a mixed meal or a varied diet or an individual human body. Because when we're thinking about what our food does for us, it rarely boils down to a single nutrient or compound. Sure, bananas may reduce absorption of a specific antioxidant, but be contributing other valuable things to your smoothie, like potassium and fiber and texture. And by the same token, berries contribute a lot more than just anthocyanins. They are also good sources of fiber and flavor. And they are unlikely to be the only source of flavanols in your diet. So if one or two gets lost along the way, it's not the end of the world. And finally, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater, because yogurt is a great source of calcium and protein and beneficial bacteria. So a little reduction in antioxidant absorption might be a fair trade. In other words, if your smoothie or your breakfast yogurt is working for you, this is one of those things I really think you can safely stop worrying about. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, you can email it to me at nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com. And to find out about having me present at your workplace or your conference, you can check out my website at wellnessworkshere.com. Nutrition Diva is a Quick and Dirty Tips podcast. Holly Hutchings is our director of podcasts. Steve Riekeberg is my audio engineer. Morgan Christensen heads up podcast operations and advertising. And thanks also to Nat Hoops for his support. But most of all, thanks to you for listening.